This is Agronomy Moment. I'm Wendell Cohen. This is podcast number, I don't know, because I haven't looked recently to even know what number we're at. Well, we are season 2, because it's 2022, and I've matched the seasons up with that to make that one easy. But we're
ready to start the one, so you're trying to see.
Yeah, I think the first year I just kind of made it as a beta, trying it out type of thing, no season. Kind of pilot program. And now we're actually in season 2, so 2 years. Today I want to talk about nitrogen, and I was fortunate here with a couple of phone calls last week to get Alex and Scott to show up, and I feel like it's tremendous when you add another guy to the room and you start going back and forth with a couple of professionals. And we have some experience, and then we start getting something going on. I don't know what the timing and how long this is going to go, but we may have to split this up in a couple segments, and if we do, we'll give you a break and let you come back later. So right now I'm going to talk about nitrogen. We've had a lot of rain in the last week or so, and I call the May monsoon season. And we have different scenarios sitting out there, I'm sure, with our winter the way it was. We have anhydrous that was put on the fall. We have some guys that have done it in the spring. Some did right before plant, maybe a week or two. Some put surface in. We got scenarios of late anhydrous, no surface in. We have scenarios of early anhydrous last winter with maybe a little surface, and then some no. I just want to hear different thoughts on what you all think as far as how do we time the top dress out? Is it necessary? I'm assuming it probably is, or how much nitrogen have we lost?
That's kind of a big question. And a bunch of different topics you kind of threw out that I wasn't thinking about when we started talking about this conversation. But I think first off, thinking about where we're at on the form of nitrogen that's in the soil now, except for anything that could have been applied in the last week or so, everything should be in the nitrate form by now.
Okay.
And that's the losable form.
Even if it's anhydrous?
Yep, even if it's anhydrous put on this spring pre-plant, that takes, the conversion to that's 3 to 8 weeks to nitrate. And in most cases, we've had anhydrous on quite a while now. So we would want to consider that the majority of that anhydrous is converted to the nitrate form, which is the losable form.
Okay.
So, with the cool temperatures we've had up till this week, really, our losses have probably been minimal because one of the main losses of nitrate is denitrification, and that requires saturated soils. So anytime we would have been saturated prior to this week, we've been fairly cool. So our losses would have been fairly minimal. And we have a couple charts here. If you're in 55 to 60 degree soil temps and you're saturated for 5 days, you could have lost up to 10% of your nitrogen, assuming all that nitrogen is in the form of nitrate.
And you were saying soil temps at 55, 60 degree temp. Okay.
Now that we're at 75 to 80 degree soil temps, you go out there today, I bet we're going to be easily in the 70, upper 70 soil temps, maybe higher. In 3 days, you can lose 60% of your nitrogen if it's in the nitrate form. And assuming that we're in the nitrate form, we're in a highly losable form in saturated conditions. You think of Missouri, Alex, we have some sandy soils, we have clay. The clay is where we see the denitrification, where we have more ponding and saturated conditions. But in the sand, say in Missouri, bottom, you get a 2-inch rain, and you're in the nitrate form, you're going to leach a lot of that due to nitrogen below the root zone.
So losses are different in the way they leave depending on soil type, but the losses are still occurring at some degree.
I would guess probably denitrification. Denitrification in Missouri is probably the bigger deal on the majority of acres by far.
Yes, sure.
You just think about how much water you see standing in fields, 4 days after a big rainfall. That is a prime opportunity for denitrification.
Those other spots, but luckily the majority of our fields, until this last weekend when we had these violent rains in southwest Missouri, up through eastern Missouri, we've been in pretty good shape this spring. We've been fairly dry. So I guess bottom line, we've probably been fairly minimal on our losses to date. But now, as we're going to see that ramp up, I was in some fields up west of Butler this morning that are still, soaking wet. And those fields are the ones that we're going to be losing that, maybe up to 60% in 3 days.
Sure.
If it stays saturated.
So looking at, just to start for timing this out, we have corn, a lot of it's emerged to like maybe V1 to V2. Could we see maybe a V8 out somewhere right before canopy?
Alex can talk about this if he wants to, but the little corn right now doesn't need a whole lot.
Sure.
And so, most of Missouri, we got a lot of guys that put on fall or early pre-plant, and in most cases that's going to carry us till we meet our big demands. So in our PFR data, it shows the PFR proven timing is V3 time frame is ideal. But I don't think
is that no pre on that?
Exactly, that's the difference, is we're putting a pretty heavy jagged pre-plant in down in our geography, so that allows us the flexibility to go much later into vegetative, probably V8, V10 time frame to make sure we get what we're going to need on for that rapid growth phase, because we probably have enough supply early on.
Yes.
Especially in a year like this where we haven't had, in my opinion, significant losses until more recent.
So, I think that's a good time to talk about that specific timing. Is that you mentioned V8, which that V8 to V10 is when you want the nitrogen. V10 is when you want the nitrogen. The corn plant wants the nitrogen. So you have to kind of plan for that, and depending on what product you're using, may impact that one way or another. Right? We were having a discussion there that it takes about 2 weeks, regardless of the product you're using, for the most part. So you kind of want to plan ahead. Well, you start talking about weather like this continuing on until June, July. You're putting on a leaf a day almost. I mean, you can really run through some growth stages in a 2 week period. So just planning for that, and I think that's where that V3 kind of comes from as well, is that you just guarantee you have it there. Now, the counter to that is in Missouri, we've talked about the denitrification. You don't want all your nitrogen on at V3 because there's a higher risk for loss. So I generally shoot for that V5, V6 time frame is for the application, regardless of how I'm doing it, whether it's urea or liquid or whatever.
Yep.
And that's kind of my safety net. But yeah, anywhere between that V6 to V8 or V5 to V6 range is the prime opportunity. It's easier to get over with equipment. It's a good chance for the corn, and usually it happens to be a drier period for us most years.
Sure,
that could change, but
yeah. But really, you're suggesting that an overlapping nitrogen, obviously. I mean, you're overlapping well from your previous split outs. You're making sure there's a good overlap, but yet you're preparing for that time that's going to start fading here in about a week. But then you got
sure we don't run out.
Yes,
exactly.
And allowing that urea to have the time to convert.
Like 37% of our N on some of these hybrids are after pollination.
Yep.
If we get too early, and if we get wet, we may run out.
So if one got late, let's say we start raining here, and the ocean don't look like it, but let's say we did. What do you think about ammonium nitrate as a form if it is an option to that person to be sprayed? Because it's a little faster conversion, right? Could it be more of a rescue, or no? Do you not care?
A lot of burn associated with that.
Yeah.
If you catch it early on little corn, I think the impact's pretty minimal.
But then a lot of times we haven't run out of gas yet. So sometimes I'm wondering if there's a place.
Urea is definitely safer.
Yes.
But you have more risk of loss.
True.
If you don't have a good canopy, making sure you have agritain or something other, you have small utility losses.
Yes. Nitrate's a fine form, but you're exactly right, is that the risk of burn is higher, and if you're waiting until that time frame that we were talking about, the risk is higher because it will be more burn.
Damaging the yield potential.
Exactly. And some of those
quality support is the best.
Well, that was going to be my next point, is that a lot of the product that I'm seeing come into our area is of poor quality. We're not as high demand for it. The biggest industry that uses it is going to be the mining industry. They don't really care if it's got a lot of power in it or not, because it blows up the same way.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So for us, we want good uniform prills.
Yes.
That's not what the industry really wants. So I have noticed that the quality of them.
So that's why there's more powder burn behind, not necessarily more burn, there's more powder. I've noticed that there's more powder behind that
That seems that way, because it didn't. When I was a kid, it wasn't that way. I mean, it was the product that everybody used. But now it doesn't seem like it's that way. So
diesel and match or sparkling.
Yeah. I wouldn't talk about that.
Okay, so anything else to do a follow up on the nitrogen thing that comes to mind here?
One thing you triggered when we were talking about how rapid growth we're going to have, we shouldn't see stacked internet. So true. Herbicide post applications. We should have to be careful that we hit the right timings. But
the visual
V8 corn instead of V8 corn.
You're saying the visual will be more telling to us.
We should be more accurate on safely applying.
Good point.
I think one last thing that I'll add, because we mentioned denitrification a lot, and maybe I need to take a step back and describe what that actually is. So like the nitrogen cycle is a thing, it happens naturally, like literally lightning shocking from air creates atmospheric nitrogen to some extent. Denitrification is kind of the reverse of that process. So we have the nitrogen cycle go from ammonia to ammonium to nitrate, or nitrite, nitrate, and as that process goes, as we get saturated, most of that process goes through aerobic bacteria. Well, the denitrification process does happen through anaerobic bacteria. So they don't need that oxygen, and that's actually how it denitrifies back to that N2 gaseous form, is that those anaerobic bacteria are actually pulling oxygen out of that nitrate molecule. So that's how we lose it. Like that's the scientific way that we lose it.
Produce the gases.
Exactly. Yep.
And I'm certainly not going to take the time to derail this conversation, but you just opened up a whole lot more questions that could is like, well, how do you reverse that? Get it out of the air.
Sounds like a good time to end.
That's okay. Anyway, hopefully this was helpful here as we move forward into the nitrogen phase of top dressing our corn here, possibly in a week or two, and help provide some insight to helping that so we don't have gaps in between our growth stage. And so we're going to move on into what's coming up next, which is herbicide, and we will be right back.
Yeah, free radicals are developed by a lot of the herbicides.
And what's a free radical?
It's a highly energetic, typically molecule of oxygen that can punch holes in cells within the plants and just cause they have to go through a lot of work to recover from that presence. And rupturing of cells. And so it's interesting. I think it's just more ammunition to go with the importance of making sure we start off clean. The importance of making sure we start off clean.
Coming back here with the herbicide, I'm going to call it the best practices or good practices for applying corn herbicide. Alex's practices.
In Alex's opinion.
And so we're going to jump into this today to see about some tips and things as we move forward, because I'm saying spring is probably happening right now. And so it needs to be, because there's been a lot going on with the rain and holding us back, and now we've got some opportunity here. Scott, you mentioned the staging the corn.
Yeah.
Let's lead off with that. Let me start with that.
We know the last several years have been so cruel and wet, and man, we've had a lot of corn that's in that V8 time frame. We got a lot of herbicides that cut off that V7, V8 time frame that was very short, and growers were making applications off-label with the potential for injury that could have occurred from being off-label. I think in most cases we skated through that pretty nicely the last few years. And that shows you that there's some buffering in those labels, but you don't want to push that all the time or you'll run into problems. Whereas this year, we're actually going to have some big V8 corn that's more normal sized, with this heat we're having already, assuming we stay warm, which at this point, as we get closer to June, we should stay warm. So I would expect to see a little more normal corn growth early season than what we normally would have. So we should be able to have a better feel for where we're at growth stage wise.
And if you see like a V7 corn, you need to be looking pretty cautious and just look at your labels a lot closer. Is about where you start.
Yeah, I think
even V6.
We hate to talk about height, but this year you're going to be like, ooh, that corn's getting tall. And if it's starting to look tall, it probably is getting up there. Whereas last year we had a lot of little corn, I got a lot of time, and really didn't.
Because a lot of the major chemicals we use are somewhere in that V7 to V8.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the spraying portion of this. Gallons per acre. 10's really nice.
10 is nice, but 15 is better.
Okay.
So
Let's go 14.9.
But it's a lot more water and a lot more trips.
it is, so 50% more, right?
Yeah.
But the reason I say 15 and 10 is actually fine, especially when you're talking about pre-emergent herbicides, because you really just want to get that stuff in the soil as even a layer if possible. You can do that at 10 gallon, you can do it at 7 gallon, that's not a big deal. But the problem is that now that we're spraying corn that's up in the fields that Scott and I have even been in just this morning, there's a lot of weeds that we need to kill. So, and a lot of these weeds, even grasses like foxtail starting to come up. You can kill foxtail with just some atrazine and crop oil. Like it'll burn it off, but you need the coverage to be able to do that. The other side of that is there's also a lot of water coming up that's going to take a little bit more than atrazine and crop oil to kill.
That's there, this big. By the end of the week, they're going to be, they're going to have some size.
Right. What would it be? Metribuzin or what would you use in there?
So like Callisto is a good product for some of those broadleaf weeds. It'll bleach them out pretty good and kill them. But the point is that not to get too far ahead of ourselves there, but is that you need that coverage to do that job. So that's where I say 15 gallon is a baseline always. Will 10 still be fine? Most likely you're going to get along with 10 just fine, but 15 kind of guarantees that.
Why risk some misses?
Exactly.
To say 5 gallons or half your trips.
Yeah.
50%.
Right.
Okay. And then just I don't want to get axed around on tips and things like that, which is pretty much a standard tip for this. Is great, right? We don't need to get too worried about that. We got to get this like Liberty, for example. We like to see some more different quality ones.
Most of this stuff's not too picky about it. I mean, if you are trying to fight some water hemp and grasses and things like that, I mean, pay a little closer attention. Most of the stuff you would add, like glyphosate, is going to be systemic anyway, so it's not going to have a big impact on what tip you pick. Just pay attention to drift and things like that, because there are some products that we will close with that do have some pretty good drift potential. Some of the APD products actually drift a little more than what you expect. So,
and then monoxide when it burns down beans. I mean, every year we see a big spike of fields.
Yeah, or if you're close to corn, dicamba, same kind of. I mean, luckily most of our beans now are dicamba tolerant. It seems like that's in the area that we're in right now. It's a pretty heavy extend market, so that's not as big of a concern, but it should still be a concern because exactly. And a lot of them going in the garden this week, so
that's true. Now going into mixing up the mix. Something that's kind of it started to interest me last winter, and I haven't been very far into studying this, but water is pretty standard spare right across the board, and so all we have to do is just throw a certain AMS in and we're good to go, right? Pound per acre, and don't have to worry about it.
Not quite. Not all water is created differently. What you'll find is that, especially if it's like well water, because we're mostly limestone aquifers in Missouri, it's going to be pretty high pH. I mean, talking 7, 9 pH isn't uncommon. But you start looking at municipal water supplies, and they generally try to pump those out as close to neutral as possible. So a lot of those are close to 7. So now, and then we're going to open up a whole other can of worms with that conversation, because pH really only matters to a few herbicides. And I'm not going to try to list them all, but glyphosate is one of them that makes a big difference because of. So when we look at higher pH waters, generally they have higher magnesium, calcium in them, and those do a very good job at tying up the glyphosate molecule in the solution. That's what AMS's purpose is, and that is to just go ahead and get that process out of the way. The glyphosate can just kind of slowly burn free. So that's where the AMS addition comes from. We do get a little help with it on the burn side of things, but when it comes to Roundup, not much. And that's why I like the pound of dry, and I still am always going to prefer spray grade AMS versus any liquid that they sell. Does a very good job. It's a pound per acre, and you're good to go.
And that covers a lot. A pound is really good at covering a lot of pH ranges.
We're
covering that.
Now, if you are dealing with something that's kind of a really wonky pH range, because most applications want to happen about 5.5 pH. So like AMS does a good job of tying up calcium and magnesium. It's not as good of an acidifying agent. It's a really good neutralizer, so it'll bring you back to 7, but it's not a very good acidifier. So there are products that will bring your solution back to 5.5. Now I don't worry about that as much with herbicides, which is what we're talking about here. When we start talking about insecticides, fungicides, it is a big concern. Because those things, as the higher in pH you get, the half-lives of those things just drop dramatically. Like insecticides at a really basic pH will kind of just crush themselves because of the solution that they're in. They like an acidic solution. So maybe acidifying down to that 5.5 mark would be a good call. And there are some liquid products that go against what I just said about the AMS stuff that do a very good job.
And they would be an acidifier.
Yeah.
And then their purpose would be is to lower the pH.
Right, because lower pH is acidic, higher is alkaline.
Right. Okay. Some of those products, don't they change color when it's dried or something? Or no?
There is one of them. Indicate 5.
Indicate 5 does.
That's what is it PFR approved?
I don't know, but
evaluated.
and it works pretty well.
How fast would we start to grow by now? With 90 degrees?
As fast as it possibly can.
Are we talking a quarter inch a day or so of water hemp?
So the water hemp that we saw this morning as we were out, we're just in the coddling stage, or maybe one each stage beyond that. Those are probably a quarter inch a day. I mean, you'll go back tomorrow and they'll be about a quarter inch taller. Their bigger cousins that are a couple leaves bigger than that are probably approaching this type of weather an inch a day is not out of the question. I mean, and size doesn't really matter as much as growing points when it comes to that plant. And every 2 inches of growth you get, double the growing points on the plant. So it's literally exponential. And so the taller they get, the harder they are to kill for that reason.
So we need to be watching. So I guess we need to be watching your soybean fields even if they're not planted then, because they're going to start taking off if they're not.
So not clean as you can.
Yeah, clean as you can.
Yeah, because a lot of like we were talking earlier, I don't know that we're any earlier with a lot of them races, but we're warm. And so the growth's going to be much more rapid than we've been accustomed to the last few years. You got water hemp out there.
Yep.
I think I've seen a couple of velvet leaf coming up, and obviously lamb spores and the earlier emerging weeds like giant ragweed is going to really be exploding.
Yes.
You should see significant bolting soon on mare's tail, which will make them much more difficult to kill. So you guys are going to have to kind of jump on this. Foxtails are growing. It's getting some growth today already.
With Roundup so high, is there even a possibility of ever eliminating that in your spray mix or like another grass alternative? Like some of the other chemistries, like you said, atrazine does work on grass?
Not, well, I wouldn't use it.
You would,
for that.
okay.
But it isn't like an added benefit of it. It's doing another job, but it does work in that limited respect. So I wouldn't try to replace Roundup with it.
Roundup is just hard to replace really when you're going out there for what you're doing.
Right. My goal to limit Roundup to save money would be to spend some of that money on heavier duty pre-emergent herbicides, multiple pre with residual applications. So maybe I can cancel rescue applications later in the season where I'm just tossing the kitchen wall.
Yeah, just overlapping residuals.
Exactly.
Things like that.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to
pressure fields.
throw 44 ounces of Roundup and a quart of Liberty at something. And I'm spending $60 in one application basically. It's kind of what we're getting to there. Exactly. And you may not catch everything. So take some of that money. I think that's the best way is to try to cancel that rescue application and just utilize the right chemistries early, and it'll work. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question because in the past it's crazy. We're now talking about whether or not to add Roundup to a standard fare, and now it's becoming actually a question because it's adding what? $14, maybe $12.
I mean, depending on where you're buying.
You're talking 30 ounces an acre or so.
Yeah, exactly.
We're starting to get up there. It's what used to be residual prices and some stuff.
Yep.
So, anyway, anything else to follow up here?
So one note that you gave me before we sat down to talk about this, I think was important to talk about is some of those corn herbicides that we are going to use post.
Okay.
Group 15 specifically. I know it's a common question, so we might want to answer it on here.
Sure.
But how much water do they take to activate?
Oh yes, like rainfall.
Right, rainfall.
Yeah, okay.
So we're not in a very bad spot when it comes to that. We've had plenty of rainfall. It looks like we've got some more chances coming up. So it's not a big concern, but generally you want about a half-inch rain for any of those type of products that need rain to activate.
Okay.
About a half inch is the key number.
Like even atrazine degree is metribuzin.
Atrazine doesn't really need the water to activate. Actually, atrazine would live if it never rained again after you put it on. But metolachlor, acetochlor, dimethamid, so Outlook, Dual, Warrant, Degree, all any of those residuals.
Callisto, so
not so much Callisto. Yeah, but that one specific, the group 15, acetamide, those specifically want about a half-inch of water. It ranges a little bit between a quarter and 3/4 of an inch, but usually half inch will get a long way.
So what happens when you get 2 inches? Are you really fading that pretty hard then?
Those aren't so bad. They can handle that fairly well, but things like atrazine, at best, I always say that any residual herbicide can last about 6 weeks. At the suggested use rate, you're looking for 6 to 8.
Let's say you get a half-inch activated and you roll. Yep.
So atrazine, if it never rained again after you put on atrazine, it may last 6 weeks. Now it seems like with the rainfalls we've been getting the past few years, I've been seeing things that it should be controlling, like giant ragweed and some of those soybeans. Literally a week and a half, 2 weeks later, just growing right through it like it's not there. And looking at some that's a weird word, graphs and things like that, and some studies that have been done. It's just not lasting in the soil as long as it used to. It's breaking down really fast, and I think it's because we've used enough of it that the bugs that do their part to break it down, they're just working much better. And then the extra rainfall stuff.
I'm going to throw one last question out here that just came to my mind, and I don't know where it's going to go. If there's not an answer for it, it's fine. Cockleburrs, in my opinion, are becoming more and more of a topic of conversation as we're going forward, and they used to not be. Do you have any thoughts on why that might? But they keep coming back afterward. It seemed like we used to have rainfalls. I have a personal thought on that from here, but I'd like to see it. My personal thought is that the focus has been so much on water hemp and marestel and these type of weeds that we have been super focused on making sure that those residuals are focused on that, and the large seed probably we're not attacking it.
Issues and EVs and all those were effective on cockleburrs and a lot of other things.
So what's some of the trade names for them?
Pursuits, Raptor was an old one, Scepters, back in the day, all those were very effective for a while. I don't really know why we'd be seeing a shift. used to be really good on them. I don't know if maybe it's not.
It still
quite as
is.
effective.
It kills them dead, but they'll go out there and it's like they're seeding from other. Like they just keep coming. There's not like the residuals that is there is not stopping them. It seems like
you can get a cultivar that emerges very late and it's about 4 inches tall and puts out 2 burrs. You know, so they will produce seed, and each burr has 2 seeds per burr. So I mean,
maybe it's just the effect of 70 years.
I agree. There are some fields you seem to have more cultivars than we used to, but I don't know that that's widespread everywhere.
So there's a couple of things going, and there is. I've noticed a trend in more cultivars. Part of it's because if you notice, like a lot of these weeds, again, not to reference stuff that's not going on here at the table. We were in the field this morning, and Hendo was just now flowering. Stuff like the general times we see stuff emerge and go to seed and reproduce and all these things has changed dramatically. I mean, Mare's Tail actually was a winter annual. Yeah, water hemp always emerged like June 1st, May 15th, and I've seen that stuff emerging as early as March of the year. So,
well, look at the shifts we're seeing like cotton being copper.
Exactly.
It's becoming more dominant in our cornfields because it's a late annual.
Yeah.
And so our herbicide programs aren't as effective, so we're seeing this build. You can see biotype shifts in the cultivar population.
Yeah.
It's allowing.
So that's what you're seeing is the emergence. I guess it would be the emergence is shifting later in the season because that's when we have a problem. Right? We have cultivars early. You can walk. I mean, we saw 100 of them today. Just their little cotyledons sticking out there. Those are going to be controlled whenever you see them again. The ones we don't see are the ones that come up when our soybeans are R4.
It's like Mare's Tail where it's in the spring.
Exactly.
Primarily in the fall.
Right.
A lot of spring emergence.
Right.
Exactly. And to your point, I mean, it's a kind of weird seed is that our chemicals are focused on controlling germination in the top inch to 2 inches of soil because that's where water hemp is and it's our biggest problem. Cultivar can emerge from quite a bit lower than that. So we're not catching that immediate germination and again that later germination is also breaking through that layer. So it kind of goes back to layered residuals, trying to get as late as possible with that second application to extend that, again, 6 to 8 week period as far out as we can to where soybean canopy can do its job and keep these things from germinating. But the cultivars, they are a problem. They're still super easy to kill.
That's true.
Even outside of glyphosate Liberty and Roundup, there's a ton of different options. I can never remember that. There's a chemical.
They're residual more based, or
No, they're actually both.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's things you can use that still kill cultivar very well. There's actually one that controls nutsedge and cultivar, and I can't remember what it's called. It's Fassagran. Yep.
Fassagran.
And does it's old, but it still works on both of those things very well.
And that's my question I go back to: is there a product or practice we need to change with biotypes changing and things like that? My thing with that is something like the Fassagran going to be having enough residual activity.
Yeah.
There's no residual to it.
Well, it's not going to get you out there where we're talking about is the emerging.
Yeah.
Let's just spray it, right?
That's overlapping residuals with the last application of a residual being as late as possible is the only way you're truly going to control. Because I mean, again,
it's so late that you
exactly
get emergence of water coming and keep killing.
Well, going back to the residual topic, or the thing you're trying to control that way is, if you have something that will kill differently, where it does more different than the what's called, what do you call it, germination point? When you're talking about the quarter-inch kill.
Yeah.
Okay, so if something's coming through the soil and it will kill it, even if it's a new shoot growth or something, is there such a thing?
Yeah.
Kill a cultivar that's already on its way. Since it germinates below the tap green.
So like your first race and like most of the ALSs and stuff will do a very good job about that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
They grow through it.
And what would be some trade names on that?
First
rate. Okay. That would be it.
Now you wouldn't be able to use that after your beans are out.
But you can do pre.
Actually,
in the weeds on there.
But you can do it pre.
Yeah.
Of the head of it.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of this guy. I think of situations. We have a lot of bottom ground, and that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, because classic and first rate stuff you can't post with beans.
Let's say this right now.
Yeah, I talked myself into a done spot.
Let's just say that we shouldn't do it for today because we don't know. But you can do it pre. You very, very good pre. You can go out there. Let's say you're on a lot of bottom. So I'm going to this bottom ground situations where there's a lot of that, and that's where your cocklebur tends to be worse because they're brought in with water.
Yep.
They float in, and then you get those late flush, but you also tend to plant those fields a little later in the year too. So that might be an option to help maybe dampen its enthusiasm at least, because it's very wearisome going out there and spraying 3 times a year with Roundup just to watch them.
Yep. But then, I mean, cocklebur doesn't seem like it's a big problem in cornfields.
That's what I just had going in my head though, is we're talking a lot about the weed that is visually rough to look at.
Yes.
But compared to the competitiveness of a high population of water hemp, I think our
Sure.
folks still needs to make sure we're
Absolutely.
getting that beast killed first.
Yeah.
So anything we do there should help us suppress at least the cockleburs to some extent where they're not as bad. And I've seen some patches of cocklebur that are
Pretty bad.
They're highly competitive compared to a bad field water hemp. Obviously, I put you in the corner.
Is it true though to say that a cocklebur is competitive enough? It lies in its fact that it has a big leaf and a lot of shade. If you get a lot of them, they'll shade out your beans.
Oh yeah, compete for the same life that everything else is.
But they're not as toxic like the water hemp is on the nutrient and the water and all
I think
that.
parts are easier to kill in general, but we're done killing at that point. I think that's what we're getting to here. So, but yeah, you walk into those field edges, it seems like they're always on the edge.
That's true.
And you'll see patches
Waterways.
where the beans are stunted.
Oh yeah.
How many cockleburs there are.
Because it's not a competition necessarily for water or nutrients. To your point, it's sunlight. And they do a very good job. So.
And they're a tremendous irritant when you're harvesting. Because they're filling your bin up with them things.
Yep.
So yeah, that's right. Anyway, I think anyone have anything else to
I don't think so.
see if we can
Pull this train back on the tracks.
Yeah.
All right.
Drifted it for a little bit.
Yeah, slightly, but it's fine. And we thank you for watching. We're gonna wrap it up and go get Alex some lunch.
See you go.
Everyone, thank you for joining us today on Agronomy Moment. We have always tried to bring you the latest, most current information possible. If you have any questions, reach out to us anytime. Thank you again to everyone who made this show possible. See you to next time.
If you need help with your operation, go to topagservices.com/signups to receive alerts. This is Agronomy Moment. Hey, this is Wendell Cohen, show host and producer. Thank you to all those who made this show possible. This show is over. See ya.